Hello and welcome to round one with four-color aggro. This week we're going to try something a little different in terms of recording strategies. We're going to go over some replays instead of having to discuss as I go, so I can think back over what I did. I've written some notes as I went through to kind of capture some things in the moment. Um, we'll just kind of talk through what happened. So we're on the draw, and our opponent is going to mulligan to 6. And so against a 7, I'd be a little skeptical of this hand, even though it has this perfect curve and perfect mana. It's very vulnerable to an opponent just trying to exchange for our cards. But with our opponent down a card, I feel, or at least I felt like mulliganing a hand with perfect mana was kind of a little aggressive. And if my opponent spends a card to trade for the 6/6 Wanderer on turn 3, that's they're going down even further, and I can handle that. So our opponent keeps a 6-card hand, and they lead on a Thraben Inspector. No real giveaways as to their archetype. So I make a very minor play here. I play the Canal first. It's this minor thing. So if my opponent's on Mardu vehicles, at least playing that deck at the Grand Prix last weekend, I kind of noticed that there was a lot of thought put into what you wanted your second turn to be when you have options. And I just thought like giving a little false information might make them make a play that might be slightly incorrect rather than playing the green land. Potentially representing Galvanic Bombardment. Maybe they make, I don't know, a Copter instead of a Scrounger or something. I don't know. Just making their plays harder. But our opponent does not do anything of the sort. They just play another Thraben Inspector and show white-red. So my turn here, pretty straightforward. We're going to play the Servant. I did think a small amount about playing the Brawler, but the reason to do this is you play the Servant. If the Servant dies, you have the Brawler for the intermediate turn, and the Woodland Wanderer is the final follow-up, which is just great. It's not like your curve actually gets disrupted if you go, one way or the other. You actually just have the perfect curve if the Servant lives or if it dies. There's no downside to it. So, Servant go. Opponent cracks a clue. No attacks, no land. Good for us. We draw a Tireless Tracker. So we're going to play our third fast land. Pretty obvious play. And then we play the Wanderer. We're just setting up. We could have played the Tracker that turn, but we'd rather set up for 2 spells next turn. Just maximum amount of tempo here. 6/6 Wanderer, also not especially threatened by the cards our opponents played. Opponent plays a Copter, no land, passes. Pretty easy beatdown. So this turn, we have a few options. We can just play Tireless Tracker and attack with both of our creatures, but then we trade our Servant, or sorry, we can't do that because of the Copter, sorry. Without the Copter, we'd still be trading Servant for Inspector, which is bad, but just running the thing into Copter, not a good idea. It is nice. I did like that we are playing a large creature, a creature big enough to attack into a Copter on curve, which comes up, well, not really on curve, but you know what I mean, just like attack into an untapped vehicle, which comes up enough that I like that. Woodland Wanderer is very impressive, I think. It's a card that really hasn't had a chance to shine. I'm glad it's seen its day. So we could just play Tracker and crack our Clue, which is kind of nonsense. We can play Brawler and Reflector, but we don't really want to bounce an Inspector. It's not a good enough tempo swing. I'd rather bounce a blocker on a key turn, even if it's only going to cost 1 later. So this is a pretty straightforward Brawler plus Tracker. The only thing is that we do have to play Tracker first, which means that we have to play Aether Hub here in order to make green-red for the Brawler follow-up, which does cost us all of our energy pre-Brawler. We can't play the Plains and have red-green untapped. Pretty minor, especially when the deck has so many forests in it relative to the other basics. So we attack. Our opponent obviously has no good blocks. Tracker, make our Clue, Brawler, There's also no need to crack the Clue this turn because getting to 3 toughness doesn't save it from anything relevant. And we also just have action. We don't need to, fill up and then go off next turn. So our opponent getting aggressive implies that they have actual 3 drops to cast after they hit their land. If they want to, they could be defensive in theory, but they have things that matter once they hit their lane, once they draw the right card. So I still don't feel like using Reflector is the best here, though. Thinking about it after the game, um, I did come to the conclusion that there's not a lot of things in the vehicles deck that you actually want to bounce with Reflector that cost more than this Inspector. So it may have been a reasonable turn to do this. However, regardless of what I'm doing, I'm going to be cracking a clue first for mana efficiency, right? Use 2, get a card, play the Reflector, it's all my 5 mana. I don't have to attune this turn if I don't want. And when I crack the clue, I should have done that first main, I think. Especially because I could have hit a spell queller to use on an in-combat trick or something like that. I guess I could have responded to whatever in combat. I should have just done it first to figure out what I'm getting. I'm kind of too stunned by this play to consider the draw spell queller. Just completely forgot about that option, actually. I was not expecting main deck Sky Whaler shot and thought that this mana was representing Fiery Temper, which I think I was okay with resolving on any target. But our opponent still takes a bunch of damage. We crack our clue. We see a pretty clean follow-up play. Possible I should have left this up so I could have attuned as well this turn, but it's not like the greatest use of mana anyways, so I'm not too concerned. Opponent uses his chance to harness down that. Plays a third Thraben Inspector. We're jokingly punished for not reflectoring one of the first 2. So, crack the clue before making any decisions. Draw another Servant. We have to attack with everything because if our opponent blocks our Servant here, I really don't care. Our opponent can copter block there and go to 6 life if they want. That's fine by me. I'm replacing it, and I have a Reflector in hand. Opponent makes that block, tanks, undoes. Worth noting, that main deck Skywhaler shot, I actually kind of liked it. Because I think that it's actually a good card in these mirrors. At least when I was playing Mardu, I wanted it in the main deck. So I wouldn't be shocked if just putting that card in your main deck's better than splashing Unlicensed Disintegration. Just like a good card, especially if the mirrors start going bigger towards Archangel Lavison as you see in my opponent's graveyard. I'd be pretty happy with Skywhaler shot in the main deck. So, me being shocked this time, I should not be shocked again in the future by it. And also, I wanted to note that this Servant beatdown is real nice. Just having your mana dork that ramps into your spells, fixes your mana, being able to clock them as well. That's a pretty rare thing, and I think this card is not being utilized well enough in decks because it does exactly this. You want to tap it a couple times for mana and then start bashing. I feel like people aren't using that side of it. Opponent chumps or trades, goes to 1, keeps back some blocks. And we get to attune for a forest, cast another beatdown bear. And so our opponent representing another Skywhaler shot, but it doesn't matter because there we go. So in sideboarding, the spell I considered was I considered a lot of things. I mean, the obvious sideboard is Harness Lightning, but really, what are you boarding out in this matchup? I came to the conclusion that, let me just pull up the deck real fast here. So I didn't want more reflectors because, as I mentioned, their 4 and 5 drops are like Gideon and Avacyn that are hard to reflector. You don't want more trackers 'cause you're not fighting on that axis. Defenses is okay, but seeing my opponent's cards, I didn't want to try to defenses against a deck that is going under me by default. Though I have like defenses, it's good if you have something like Kalitas that you have to protect against them, but I didn't expect that. Don't want negate, even though it counters copter. Don't want Jace, don't want rejection, even though it counters copter. So it really was just 2 harness lightning. And looking at the deck, I ended up sideboarding out 1 reflector mage and 1 tireless tracker. So I don't like reflector, but it does something. I do like reflector out of blue white where it's protecting Archangel Avacyn, or not sorry, protecting Gideon, the other good card. Sorry. So you can establish a Gideon on a semi-stable board and take over. But here we don't have any of that, so I'm off it. And then I took out a tireless tracker. I still wanted one, make my deck a little better at going late against potential Avacyn sideboard, but it's not the greatest card, a little clunky. This card's stock has really fallen this year as the metagame stops getting so bogged down. Um, yeah, not a lot of the other cards are imminently sideboardable. So it was just that 2 card swap is what I ended up on. So, going to game 2 here. We end up keeping our 7. Our opponent does as well on the play. Good mana again. How lucky that all of our lands are untapped dual lands or 5-color lands. Our opponent leads on an Aether Hub, which implies that their mana is not going to be great this game. We lead on our untapped land, just get as many of these on the battlefield as possible early, as long as it doesn't mess up your mana. Our opponent has a Copter on 2. And I think that you just kind of have to develop in the face of Copter in this format. You can't just hold up removal unless your deck's designed to play at instant speed. So I lead on Servant. I'm going to curve Servant into Brawler Brawler. I think that gets the most power on the battlefield as fast as possible. I have a bunch of energy sources, so I'm not too concerned about burning through my energy with Hub Conduit Servant. Um, and just in the face of Copter, I want to shove as hard as possible. Just give my opponent the least amount of time to set up. So there's a Thraben Inspector and an attack that turn that I just skipped through. Not a lot of important action. Another Aether Hub. Again, my opponent probably has bad mana this game. So this turn, I'm going to just cast 2 creatures off of this delightful off-the-top Sanctum so I don't lose as much energy. But I will say, I did briefly consider playing around Declaration in Stone, and then decided that it was not worth my time. Just like, gonna get blown up by that sometimes. And that EOT Harness Lightning was a real relief. So I take another Copter hit. My opponent passes. So I attune for the planes so I don't have to use energy to cast my Queller. And I just get to do this in combat, right? So I can protect against removal or whatever. Or this one that I wasn't quite expecting. As soon as I saw the blue-red land in game 1, I thought my opponent was just splashing for rejection. But I guess it's also Spell Queller. They're probably some variant of the Andrew Tendrum list. Worth noting, I did see my opponent discard a Dragon Master Outcast to Copter this game. And that's a card that I think is kind of flying under the radar. Alexander Hayne had it in his, Glint Eye control deck or to go by the Nephilim, or I actually don't know the name of the new commander that's the 4-color there. But he was Grixis splashing Nisa and Lumbering Falls or something insane. But he said it was one of the better cards in his deck. So I would not be surprised to see more Dragon Master Outcast moving forward. Just a very efficient threat that kind of is easy to get into curve and continue interacting. So my opponent plays Queller. And I debate for a minute because putting their Queller under a Queller leaves me open to a removal spell blowout. But I'd rather... The thing is that if I use my removal spell on the Queller, like I could just let the Queller eat my 2/2, but that just seems like a recipe for disaster, letting my opponent just get ahead on board and then keep coptering me. So I think I have to keep up the pressure. I could Harness Lightning down the Queller, but then I can't harness lightning down something later. So I'd rather have the utility spell that clears the way. Um, and then even if my opponent does kill the Queller to set everything up, I can just hold my removal spell specifically for that. I don't have to act on my harness lightning while they have spell Queller mana up. Is really the deal, and I just didn't plan on doing that. So Queller eats Queller. My opponent takes a bunch of damage. I take a hit, and Fairgrounds Warden hits the battlefield. Really like that card in this format. Another card that I think is underplayed. Um, Being a dwarf for Depala is really nice. So my opponent gets their Queller back. I do also want to note that there's no point where I really left up mana. I could have left up 2 mana on that, or just mana at some point on that for harness lighting up opponent's copter defensively. It's just not great. Your opponent can just play around it and like eat your mana. Sam Black kind of mentioned that in his article. Was it on the 26th of October, I believe, where he's kind of saying that the next step in the metagame is people are just going to cut all the removal and just bash through copters as much as they can, which is very possible. Um, Also worth noting that putting a Queller under Queller is a little less risky when Skywheeler Shot is one of the removal spells I'm expecting. So, nice. Can't Skywheeler Shot, its one downfall is that it can't kill a spell Queller, which is kind of a pretty big downfall. Also worth noting that the use of spell Queller by my opponent to flash into ambush a 2/2 is one of the better uses of it if you can get that use. So just don't forget that you can cast it to not counter a spell. It's always a very viable thing with those flash threats. Anyways, back to the game in progress. So we're going to draw a Long Tusk Cub. So this turn's pretty straightforward in my eyes. I don't really get a ton back if I kill the Warden or the Spell Queller with the Harness Lightning. So I'm just going to bash him with the Brawler. If my opponent double blocks, then I get something, but they're not going to. And I just opt to completely advance my board again. Don't really want to be defensive, rather just time my Harness Lightning better. So I'm going to play the Whirler and a Cub. Opponent's still getting a little aggressive here. I start worrying about my life total about now. So I might have to chump block in the future. And so they leave up mana for a potential Queller, but I'm going to make 2 Copters on end step. After they may, so this is what happens. So they may face Skywheeler Shot my 3/2 to play around a potential Queller in hand, which is great for me. I didn't want to triple block the Copter, by the way, with my 9 energy worth of Thopter tokens, because I didn't just want to lose all my energy to a removal spell. I'd rather clock back and chump. I think that's one of the upsides of Whirler Virtuoso is that you get to be a little flexible in your aggro control plan. 1/1 flying tokens do a lot of good chump block attacks, as evidenced by Bitter Blossom over the years. So now my opponent's tapped out. From here, I have a pretty good line where I can clear the Queller, make flying attackers, shove with a bunch of stuff. My opponent can't block the Cub due to it being able to grow and get back my Queller. And I just need to leave back 3 energy to make a chump block Copter, just so I don't die to something random. So there's those 2 Copters. We're going to draw a Woodland Wanderer. So I'm end up going to kill this thing. This is a mistake, by the way. I should have tapped the Aether Hub. I was just defaulting to I already have a green land on tap, but I ended up having to spend an extra energy to cast this big Wanderer later. And I want to cast the Wanderer because I just want a couple blockers back. To prevent myself. I don't know how I'm dying, but I just want to be able to not take a bunch of damage. I could attack the 2/3 in so my opponent can't chump block with the Fairground Warden. I'm using this to cast the Wanderer, but if this attacks, my opponent just has this easy block here. They're not going to block here anyways, so I don't think there's anything profitable. So my opponent makes this block. I felt pretty happy about what was going on. So they don't. I don't pump the Cub because I want the 3 energy to make a Thopter token to block here if my opponent attacks, just to preserve life points at this point. And I do need to have now 5 energy because I messed up, which conveniently I do. So get to tap all my mana. I did a little bit wrong due to Moto rules. You're supposed to add mana to your mana pool before you cast any converge spell, just so you make sure you have all the right colors. But you know, just good Moto safety. Opponent makes a dork. I end up not spending this energy because I want to be able to pump this to a 3 power creature in the face of whatever. So I draw my card. And I don't realize it at the point, but my opponent's actually dead on board. I just kind of look at the board, and my immediate assessment is just shove with anything because I don't think there's anything good that happens. I still have 2 blockers to block the Gideon on the way back. My opponent tries to make some blocks, but just kind of dies. So if you count this through from my opponent's side, um, this absorbs the most damage jumping here. This absorbs the most damage jumping here. Nothing. I mean, I guess they could block here and absorb 3 either way. And I guess this chumps here. So it's chump, chump, chump. Maximum amount of damage absorbed 3, 3, effective 3, and my opponent still takes 6 and dies. So my opponent moves some cards around, figures this out, and concedes the game. Worth noting, I do not like this combination of Prairie Stream plus Aether Hub. Just that mana is so awkward. Um, just one of the bad combinations in the format as opposed to the good ones.